What if Doctor Strange entered the grim darkness of Warhammer 40,000? The sorcerer supreme awakens on the cold skeleton of a dead craftworld, his mystic senses instantly assaulted by the scream of the warp. Here, reality is wounded. Magic does not flow cleanly through hidden channels or ancient dimensions. It bleeds through a psychic abyss inhabited by hungry gods, predatory souls, and nightmares older than empires. The eye of Agamotto burns with warning as forces from every corner of the galaxy turn toward him at once. The Imperium's witch hunters, alien seers who read fate like scripture, and servants of a god of change that sees in Strange both threat and opportunity. In a universe where faith is weaponized, hope is rationed, and every miracle risks corruption, can even the master of the mystic arts remain untouched? Or will the warp devour the one man arrogant enough to believe he can master it? Above the ruined craft world, space was silent. Then it split open. The void tore like fabric under a blade, its edges blazing with impossible color, and a lone figure was hurled through the wound. Dr. Stephen Strange crashed hard onto a vast platform of pale wraithbone, the cloak of levitation snapping around him as he struck the surface and slid. The breath left his lungs in a violent gasp. Pain flashed through his scarred hands. For a few seconds, he could do nothing but lie there and hear the echo of his own pulse. This was wrong. The spell had failed in a way it never should have. Dimensional transit was meant to be precise, controlled, elegant. This had been a violent expulsion, as if something had seized his spell mid-cast and dragged it into alien waters. Strange forced himself upright. The cloak steadied him as he looked around. Beneath him, the material felt smooth and warm despite the surrounding chill, organic and architectural at once. Towers curved upward like frozen song, elegant and impossibly refined even in ruin. Scorch marks scarred the pearlescent surfaces. Cracked arches leaned over empty walkways. Dust drifted through stale, recycled air. No living mind registered nearby. And yet something was watching him, not from the corridors, not from behind the broken walls, from beyond, from the membrane of reality itself. Strange felt it instantly, vast and starving, pressing against the world like a predator sniffing at glass. The boundary between dimensions here was shockingly thin. He had stood near ruptures before, touched the edges of hell dimensions, crossed the astral gulf more times than most beings in existence could comprehend. But this was different. The veil was not merely weak, it was diseased. He raised his trembling hands and traced a centering sigil in the air. Golden mandalas bloomed between his fingers, familiar and beautiful for a fraction of a second before warping at the edges. Their geometry bent into forms he had never studied. The ambient force of this place interfered with the spell immediately, as if every incantation here had to pass through contaminated water. Strange drew a slow breath. "Eye of Agamotto," he whispered, touching the amulet at his chest. "Show me where I am." The relic opened. Green light spilled outward, and knowledge struck him like an avalanche. He saw a galaxy at permanent war. He saw worlds burning as a matter of policy. He saw a throne of gold supporting a corpse that was not dead. Armies beyond counting marched in the name of a decaying empire. Alien civilizations fought extinction with prophecy, cruelty, or despair. And beneath it all, behind it all, through it all, he saw a storm, an ocean of emotion and psychic force boiling beneath reality, feeding four vast intelligences so immense that even beings like Dormammu seemed localized by comparison. Strange broke the connection with a gasp and staggered back. The vision ended, but its truth remained. This was not his universe, not an adjacent reality, not a distorted branch of known creation. It was a separate cosmology, one whose laws were interwoven with that screaming sea he had glimpsed. Magic here was not magic in the way he understood it. It was knotted into psychic resonance, into souls, into thought and fear and desire, into the warp. A deep mechanical rumble shook the craft world. Strange looked up through a fractured dome and saw a ship descending from the black above. Human design, but brutalized into something harsher. Angular armor, cathedral silhouettes, weapons bristling along its flanks like a declaration of paranoia. He reached outward with his senses and felt the minds aboard. Human, yes, but layered with discipline, implants, indoctrination, hatred. They had felt him arrive. The cloak tightened across his shoulders, Sensing his tension, Strange moved quickly into the interior of the dead structure, following the flow of ancient architecture deeper into its hollow heart. Corridors were graceful, almost impossibly so, grown rather than built. The walls responded faintly to his presence. Dust-coated relics lined alcoves like the remains of a museum for a fallen species. When his fingers brushed a crystalline surface, a flicker of memory pulsed into him. Tall, elegant beings walking these halls in sorrow and ritual. Aeldari, he realized. The name arrived attached to emotion. Loss, pride, grief, so old it had become culture. A siren wailed somewhere in the structure, a warning system waking after ages of silence. The humans had boarded. Strange followed his instincts toward the center of the craftworld and entered a vast chamber whose ceiling vanished into darkness. At its heart stood a throne-like apparatus formed from crystal and bone-white arcs, surrounded by intricate psychic machinery. The structure hummed at the edge of perception, not dead but sleeping. It called to him with quiet urgency. Gateway, nexus, archive, perhaps even a clue to getting home. The doors exploded inward. Armored troops poured into the chamber with disciplined violence, weapons raised. Their black armor was chased with crimson, purity seals, and silver skulls. Strange red fanatical purpose in every motion. At their head strode a woman whose face was half living flesh and half polished augmetic metal. Her organic eye burned with absolute certainty. "In the name of the Holy Ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition," she said, voice amplified by her armor, "you will surrender." Strange slowly raised his hands. "I'm not your enemy." Her laugh carried no humor at all. "The warp births no accidents, sorcerer. Your manifestation has been detected across 3 sectors. The taint around you is unmistakable." "I serve no taint," Strange said. "I was pulled here. I'm trying to understand where here is." "Lies," she gestured, and 2 soldiers advanced carrying devices that pulsed with a deadening field. Strange felt the effect at once, his mystic senses muffled. Spell structures grew heavy and uncertain in his mind. Not anti-magic exactly, but suppression. Null technology. He acted before they reached him. With a sharp motion of both hands, he unleashed the winds of Watum. Golden force struck the advancing soldiers and hurled them aside. But even that simple spell twisted under alien interference, its edges fraying into unstable arcs. The Inquisitor leveled a crackling pistol at his chest. Witchcraft confirmed. Sentence is death. The shot never came. A wet, ripping sound tore through the chamber behind the Imperial line. Then came screams. Strange turned and saw shadows moving through the Inquisition troops with impossible speed. Armor split open. Blood sprayed in ribbons across pale walls. The attackers were thin, graceful figures clad in barbed elegance, their blades humming with malicious energy. They fought like performers and butchers all at once. "Drukhari!" the Inquisitor shouted, spinning and firing into the melee. "Defensive formation!" Strange recognized the psychic signature at once. Kin to the dead builders of this place, but utterly corrupted in spirit. Where the craftworld memories had held dignity and discipline, these newcomers radiated exquisite cruelty. Predation sharpened into art. Caught between 2 hostile forces, Strange abandoned diplomacy. The 7 rings of Ragador flashed around his forearms as he lifted into the air with the help of the cloak. Bands of golden restraint whipped outward toward both sides, aiming to disable rather than kill. But the moment they touched the Drukhari raiders, the spell faltered. Their armor and weapons drank at the energy greedily, as if pain and psychic force were currencies they understood better than matter. One of them looked up at Strange through a grotesque helm and laughed. "A new soul," it hissed. Bright, untasted, cold, traveled down Strange's spine. Below him, the fight worsened. The Inquisition soldiers were disciplined, but the raiders were faster, crueler, ecstatic in violence. The Inquisitor herself met one of the Drukhari leaders in single combat, her power sword shrieking against twin curved blades. Strange changed tactics. If the ambient laws of this universe disrupted his usual structures, then he would impose his own. He spread his hands wide and folded the chamber around itself. Reality bent, mirrors bloomed from air, angles multiplied. The room fractured into reflective corridors, false distances, duplicated enemies. It was not the true mirror dimension. He could already sense that this cosmos had no easy equivalent, but it was close enough to disorient. The Drukhari hissed in surprise as they struck reflections instead of flesh. Imperial troops staggered, but used the confusion to regroup. Strange descended near the Inquisitor, maintaining the dimensional distortion with constant motion of his fingers. "I can get your people out," he said. She pointed her pistol at his face, despite blood running down one side of her neck. "Why would I trust you?" "Because those creatures don't want you dead," Strange said. "They want you alive, and I'm guessing that's worse." A flicker passed through her one human eye. Fear quickly buried. "What do you want?" she asked. "Time. Let your soldiers withdraw to the ship. Give me access to this craft world. No execution. No immediate betrayal." "What makes you think I came to preserve this Xenos ruin?" Strange gave her a hard look. "Experience." Around them, mirror surfaces cracked as the Drukhari adapted and began hurling hooked weapons through the distortions. The structure would not hold much longer. The Inquisitor made her decision. "Sergeant, evacuate the wounded. Fall back to the boarding zone. I will cover retreat with this asset." The surviving soldiers obeyed at once, dragging their injured away. She turned back to Strange. "Inquisitor Vale, Ordo Hereticus. Cross me, and the Imperium will pursue you to the edge of creation." "Dr. Stephen Strange," he replied, "and I have no interest in adding your empire to my problems." The false chamber shattered in a storm of golden fragments. A Drukhari leader landed before them in a fluid crouch, twin blades slick with blood. He removed his helm and revealed a gaunt, beautiful face stretched over malice. "Such fear," he purred. "And that one," his dark eyes fixed on Strange. "That one reeks of elsewhere." Strange summoned layered shields around himself. "I'm having a crowded day," the Archon smiled. "I am Archon Vidrax of the Flayed Nerve. Your soul shines with untapped novelty, Mon-K sorcerer. I think I shall keep it." Vale backed toward the exit, firing disciplined shots to cover her retreat. "Try not to die before we decide whether to burn you," she said. "Warm sentiment," Strange muttered. Then he was alone with 12 Drukhari raiders. They circled him like sharks around a light source, every movement elegant, every intention obscene. Strange struck first, abandoning restraint. Bolts of Balthak flared crimson from his fingers and slammed into the nearest raiders, overloading their nervous systems. 3 collapsed instantly. Vidrax crossed the distance with terrifying speed. His blades flashed for tendons, joints, nerves. Precision, not slaughter. He wanted pain. The cloak yanked Strange sideways before steel kissed flesh, then whipped him upward. Strange countered with the crimson bands of Sidorak, binding the Archon in thick arcs of force. But the Drukhari armor absorbed and bled off the spell with unnatural hunger. "Your power tastes distant," Vidrax whispered, already slipping free. "My homunculi will savor your anatomy for centuries." The raiders closed in. Strange understood then that brute repetition would get him killed. These beings were products of a reality where psychic force was ecosystem and weapon. He needed more than imported technique. He needed adaptation. He extended his awareness into the dead craft world itself. The wraithbone all around him was not inert. It was saturated with residue, structure, memory, psychic architecture, laid down by a species that had shaped thought into material. Strange had worked with sanctums, ley lines, cursed relics, sentient dimensions. This was different, but not incomprehensible. He touched the current. Power surged through him, colder and sharper than terrestrial magic. Alien, but usable. He filtered it through familiar forms and let the energy decide its final expression. Runes ignited around him in blue-white fire. The Drukhari recoiled in genuine shock. Those symbols meant something to them. Ancestral, forbidden, old as grief. "Impossible," Vidrax snarled. "No human speaks the old words." "I'm not speaking them," Strange said. "I'm listening." He brought his hands together. The runes expanded outward in a wave. Where they touched the raiders, their shadows were ripped away from their bodies, as if the craft world itself rejected them. Several screamed and collapsed into heaps of smoking armor. Others fled back. Only Vidrax endured the blast, though his armor blackened and one cheek split open from the force. His expression shifted from rage to something rarer. Fear. "This is not over," he hissed. slamming a device at his wrist. A portal of writhing dark light opened behind him. You are marked now, sorcerer. The galaxy is large. Suffering makes it smaller. He vanished with his survivor. Silence fell. Strange stood amid corpses, burning residue, and the fading hum of awakened wraithbone. His hands shook harder now. The borrowed current had cost him. Then came slow applause. He turned. A tall figure stood in the doorway wearing Baroque power armor of deep cobalt, etched with occult sigils and avian motifs. No visible weapon. No need. The psychic pressure around him was tremendous, disciplined, and rotten. Most impressive, Doctor, the newcomer said in a cultured voice. You adapt far faster than most. Strange straightened despite exhaustion. Another fan. The figure advanced. I am Ahriman. The name meant nothing to Strange personally, but the resonance around it did. Scholar, exile, sorcerer, ruin held together by brilliance and obsession. You are not Imperial, Strange said. Certainly not, Ahriman replied. With a casual gesture, blue flame consumed the fallen bodies around them, reducing blood and flesh to ash. My interests and the Imperium's rarely align. What interests bring you here? At first, curiosity. Your arrival tore a remarkable wound in the immaterium. His gaze sharpened. Now, I find myself far more interested in you. Strange kept his distance. I'm not looking for allies. That is because you have not yet understood the conditions of this universe. Ahriman inclined his head toward the throne at the center of the chamber. You hoped the Infinity Circuit might answer your questions, perhaps even guide you home. Admirable. It cannot. You seem very certain. I am. Ahriman's voice softened into temptation. But I possess knowledge of older roads, forgotten passages through realities, methods by which a mind such as yours might traverse dimensions not by accident, but by right. The offer was dangerous precisely because it was plausible. Strange had met enough beings intoxicated by knowledge to recognize the pattern instantly. Ahriman wore self-control like a priest's vestment, but corruption swam beneath it. Not clumsy evil, refined compromise. The kind that called itself necessity. Knowledge with strings attached usually costs more than ignorance, Strange said. Ahriman's expression cooled. You mistake me for a recruiter. I am not offering loyalty. I am offering relevance. Here, every power serves a greater pattern whether it wishes to or not. And what pattern do you serve? For the first time, something like amusement touched Ahriman's eyes. An excellent question. One you may survive long enough to understand. Warp force gathered around him. Strange felt the shape of the attack before it manifested. Ahriman did not throw fire or lightning. He rewrote assumptions. The air between them changed composition, becoming toxic. The floor beneath Strange transmuted into rippling quicksilver that reached for his boots. The cloak yanked him upward as Strange invoked the shield of the seraphim. Golden light sealed a breathable sphere around him, just as corrosive vapor spread outward. Good reflexes, Ahriman observed. Occupational requirement. Strange retaliated with modified crimson bands, this time weaving local symbolic geometry into the spell. Hybrid force lanced out and wrapped around Ahriman's protective aura. For an instant, it held. The sorcerer's eyes widened slightly. Then blue fire roared from his armor, burning through the bindings. The chamber changed. Walls melted and reformed. Angles broke. Space softened. Ahriman was imposing his will directly onto matter, and worse, onto the seam between reality and whatever poisoned dimension lay beneath it. Stop, Strange warned. You're thinning the boundaries. Precisely. Shapes began to emerge from the air things with too many joints, too many eyes, too much symbolism and not enough flesh. Daemons. Not metaphorical, not hallucinatory. Ideas weaponized into predatory form. That was enough. Strange centered himself and reached beyond this universe. One truth remained constant no matter the cosmology. The multiverse was larger than local corruption. Powers existed outside this galaxy's psychic sea. He had touched them countless times. By the Vishanti, he intoned, weaving sigils at impossible speed. By the crimson cosmos of Sidorak. By the purple dimension of Agamotto. By the airy reaches of Balthak Answer. Light erupted around him. Not warp light. Not psychic discharge. Clean extra-dimensional force. entering this diseased reality like a scalpel. The demonic forms screamed as their structures destabilized. Ahriman staggered. For the first time, uncertainty cracked through his composure. Impossible, he breathed. Power from beyond the great ocean. Strange answered with action. Mandalas expanded from his hands, not just banishing the manifested entities, but reinforcing natural law around them. Where Ahriman had softened reality, Strange made it remember how to be rigid. The opposing forces collided in a storm of color and pressure. Still, Ahriman resisted, driving raw warp energy into the contest. The chamber shook. The dead craft world groaned. Strange realized neither of them could sustain this without tearing the place apart. So he changed the battlefield again. The eye of Agamotto opened. Green light washed over Ahriman. Time slowed around the sorcerer. Not fully stopped this universe, resisted temporal control in strange, splintered ways, but enough. Enough for Strange to move inside a stretched instant and shape a banishment not against Ahriman's body, but against his connection to the warp force he was channeling. The spell landed. Ahriman dropped to one knee with a snarl as the link severed. The daemons vanished. The distortion snapped back. The chamber returned to bruised stillness. Breathing hard, Strange lowered his hands. Ahriman looked up at him with something perilously close to respect. What are you? I've been asking the same question about this universe since I got here. No psyker commands such force without damnation, Ahriman said. No mortal channels power external to the warp and remains intact. In my universe, Strange said, we have more than one road to power, and some of them don't demand worship. Ahriman slowly rose. Cracks in his armor sealed themselves with whispering light. Then you are either the most dangerous anomaly this galaxy has seen in millennia, or the answer to a problem even I cannot solve. I'm not staying long enough to become either. Ahriman gave him a long, measuring look. You may discover that this reality does not easily release what it has touched. Tzeentch has noticed you now. So has the Imperium, possibly others. His tone turned almost gentle. When experience has stripped away your optimism, Dr. Strange, seek me. Enlightenment often begins as disappointment. Blue fire flashed. He was gone. The chamber felt cleaner in his absence, though no less ominous. Strange turned back to the psychic throne. Ahriman had claimed it was dead, but he could still feel residue within it, like embers under ash. Carefully, he approached and laid both scarred hands on its arms. The infinity circuit answered. Memory flooded him. He saw the craft world alive, its Aeldari moving through these halls with elegance beyond human civilization. He saw artistry fused with psychic engineering, spiritual discipline fused with impossible decadence. Then he saw the collapse. Excess without restraint, pleasure without boundary. The birth scream of a new god born from collective corruption. Worlds dying, souls devoured, survivors fleeing into the stars aboard living world ships. Then came the final chapter of this craft world. Imperial attack, boarding actions, bolter fire in sacred halls, xenophobic zeal baptized as necessity. The souls preserved within the circuit dimmed one by one as caretakers died and protective structures failed. Even memory succumbed eventually to the warp. Strange pulled away, shaken. He understood two things immediately. First, this place could not shelter him for long. Too many factions would return. Second, if anyone in this galaxy could help him understand the warp without surrendering to it, it would be the surviving craftworld seers. He withdrew the sling ring from his tunic and turned it between aching fingers. Its last attempt had failed because there had been no familiar coordinates to anchor against. But now he had glimpsed maps of another people's psychic geography. Strange focused on one repeating image from the infinity circuit, a living craftworld cloaked in shadow and foresight. Ulthway. He turned the sling ring. Sparks fought him, sluggish and resentful, but a portal opened at last. Through it, he saw living wraithbone corridors lit by psychic glow. Robed figures turned in surprise. Strange stepped through. Weapons met him instantly. Aeldari guardians in black and bone armor formed a ring around him, elegant rifles trained at center mass. Behind them stood several seers, draped in rune-inscribed robes, their presence vast and disciplined. The eldest among them moved forward with serene caution, his eyes clouded with milky blindness that did nothing to diminish the force of his perception. "Hold," he said to the warriors. This one was foreseen, though not in detail. Strange lifted empty hands. Sorry for the entrance. It's been a difficult day. The old seer studied him. I am Farseer Ethril. You are no creature born of this universe. Yet you wield its currents with curious speed. I'm trying not to drown in them, Strange replied. Dr. Stephen Strange, sorcerer, temporarily stranded. Ethril gestured, and the guardians lowered their weapons a fraction. Come. The Dome of Crystal Seers is a more fitting place to discuss a rip in fate. Strange followed. Ulthway was unlike the dead craft world in every possible way. The same organic architecture lived here, but it sang. Walls pulsed softly with psychic life. Spirit stones glimmered in alcoves. Civilians paused to stare as he passed, their expressions a mixture of caution, disdain, and reluctant fascination. Your people don't trust humans, Strange observed. With reason, Ethril replied. Your Imperium would exterminate us if it could. Your kind's psychic gift is usually a prelude to catastrophe, and your species has made paranoia into policy. Strange gave a dry nod. Not the first time humans have disappointed me. They entered the Dome of Crystal Seers, and for a moment even Strange forgot his exhaustion. Statues of translucent crystal stood in concentric circles around a central platform. They were not sculptures. He felt consciousness in them, silent, ancient, compressed into stillness. At the center lay a pool of liquid crystal that reflected not merely the room, but possibilities. Other seers waited nearby, including a woman whose runes shone brighter than the rest. The human anomaly, she said. At last. Warlock Seer Marcha, Ethril said by way of introduction. She is less patient than I am. Usually because I am more correct, Marcha said. Strange looked from one to the other. I'm going to guess you know more about why I'm here than I do. We know enough to worry, Marcha said. Ethril motioned him toward the crystal pool. Look, if you dare. The pool of becoming shows truths through futures. Strange hesitated only briefly. Then he knelt at the edge. The surface changed. He saw himself casting the original spell in his own world. Then he saw what he had missed. Threads from this universe crossing into the working, latching onto it deliberately. His arrival had not been random. Something had interfered. Something from this side had wanted a breach. Then the future paths bloomed. He saw himself standing beside Imperial armies, reinforcing reality against the warp while becoming a weapon of their regime. He saw himself accepting Ahriman's offer, diving into forbidden knowledge until ambition hollowed him into a servant of change. He saw himself captured by Drukhari and kept alive in exquisite torment. He saw himself becoming something else entirely, something new in the warp, a power born from alien principles entering this galaxy's psychic ecosystem. He recoiled from the pool. Ethriel's voice was quiet. Now you understand. I understand that I've been dragged into a game I never agreed to play. Marcha almost smiled. Agreement is not a force the great powers respect. The great powers, Strange repeated. The gods in the warp. Gods, Ethril said, if one must use the word. Vast psychic intelligences shaped by the emotions of sentient species over ages beyond counting. They are not easily slain. Then they can be contained, Strange said. The seers exchanged a look. Our people once believed as you do, Marcha said. We possessed mastery, art, foresight. We believed ourselves above consequence. Then our excess birthed the god from our own shadow, and half our race was eaten in a single cosmic scream. Strange absorbed that in silence. Before he could respond, alarms howled through the craft world. The dome shuddered. Psychic tension raced through the wraithbone walls like lightning under skin. We are under attack, one of the other seers said. Imperial vessels shadowed your trail, Ethril replied, already moving. But they are not the true danger. Strange felt it a second later. Something enormous pressed against reality beyond the craft world. The same presence he had sensed when he first arrived, now magnified beyond measure. Marcha's face lost all composure. The breach widens. Strange understood instantly. His transit had left a weakness between worlds. While he had sought answers, something in the warp had been worrying at that wound, widening it, probing it, preparing passage. Tzeentch, Ethril said. And unlike the Inquisitor earlier, he spoke the name with care. The Changer of Ways has found your trail. They reached an observation platform overlooking void space beyond the craft world. Strange stopped dead. A tear spread across the stars like a wound in glass, enormous and growing. Its edges bled impossible color. Imperial warships hung near it, dragged out of formation by tidal forces no machine was built to endure. Hulls groaned, engines flared, crew signatures winked out by the thousands. Beyond the breach, Strange saw the warp more clearly than before. Impossible architecture, libraries burning with thought, rivers of emotion, crystal labyrinths forming and reforming in response to intent, and behind it all, an intelligence of staggering scope, faceted, amused, patient. Tzeentch had seen his universe. That was the real threat. Not merely Strange being stranded here. A path had opened. If that thing crossed in any meaningful way into his home reality, billions would be vulnerable to a corruption they had no conceptual defenses against. I need to get closer, Strange said. That is suicide, Mercha replied. I didn't say it was a good plan. An Aeldari pilot was summoned with visible reluctance. He regarded Strange as one might regard a particularly articulate explosive. Still, he agreed to take a sleek wraithbone vessel toward the anomaly. The craft launched. They slipped through void like a thought. Imperial gunships opened fire the moment they were identified, beams lancing past as the pilot twisted through trajectories with impossible grace. The Mankey are panicking, the pilot said flatly. They're not entirely wrong, too, Strange replied, eyes fixed on the breach. As they approached, the tear in reality grew monstrous. The nearest Imperial ship was already folding inward, along impossible axes. Strange could see tiny human silhouettes through damaged viewports, watching helplessly as the laws of space ceased to matter. How close can you get? Strange asked. 50 meters before the shielding begins to fail, the pilot said. 3 minutes before our souls become negotiable. Good enough. He moved to the airlock. The pilot looked at him with what might have been respect. Your species rarely dies for anything beyond pride. Mine does plenty of both. The outer hatch opened. Vacuum took him. The cloak wrapped around him tightly, maintaining a precious envelope of survivable air as it carried him toward the breach. The sheer psychic pressure was almost unbearable. Thoughts not his own whispered at the edges of his mind. Promises, solutions, curiosities, infinite possibilities wrapped in poison. He stopped in open space 50 meters from the wound. It was worse up close. The breach was feeding on nearby destruction, on reactor deaths, on fear, on every psychic discharge from every dying mind. If it kept growing, demonic entities would not merely look through, they would pour through. And once the line between this universe and his own was located and stabilized, the consequences would ripple beyond measure. Strange raised both hands. The eye of Agamotto opened. Mystic geometry spread around him in bright gold, forming a lattice around the edges of the tier. He began a sealing pattern, adapting techniques once used to repair ruptures between dimensions. For a few seconds it worked. The edges drew inward. Then a presence touched his mind directly. Not words exactly. More like a concept masquerading as speech. You deny me a new realm, little sorcerer. The force of that attention nearly broke his concentration. It was alien and intimate at once, like being examined by a hurricane made of intellect. I offer you what you seek, the presence continued. Futures, secrets, mastery without end. A universe untouched by my hand could become yours to shape. Why resist kinship? Knowledge poured into Strange's mind uninvited. Formulas for impossible spells, hidden cures, alternate histories, the solution to injuries he had once believed permanent. 1,000 lifetimes of study dropped into a single tempted instant. For one dangerous heartbeat, he understood how easily men like Ahriman fell. Then he saw the hook beneath the gift. Acceptance meant alignment. Alignment meant conduit. He would become the bridge. No, Strange said into the void, teeth clenched. I've heard better offers. Mocking amusement rippled through his consciousness, then turned cold. The entity attacked, not with claws or fire, but with mutable thought. Crystal ideas pierced at his mental wards. His seal faltered. The breach widened another fraction. Shapes moved beyond it. Watching. Waiting. Strange realized he was solving the wrong problem. Trying to overpower the breach with his own reserves alone was arrogance. There was more than enough energy here already. Imperial reactor cores, psychic shielding from the Aeldari craft, the breach itself. He didn't need to overpower chaos. He needed to redirect it. He changed the spell. Golden lines shot outward from his hands and connected to the dying Imperial ships, drawing off their catastrophic energies before they detonated uselessly into the warp. Other lines sank into the Aeldari vessel, harmonizing with its wraithbone field. The final set entered the breach itself, not resisting its output but catching it, looping it, defining it. By the rings of Ragador, by the bands of Sidorak, by order imposed on ruin, he thought not for the first time in his life, but never on this scale. The lattice brightened. Tzeentch pressed harder. You cannot control change. I'm not controlling it, Strange said, every word dragged through pain. I'm giving it direction. The wild emissions of the breach began to circulate through the lattice. Expansion turned to rotation. Leakage became recursion. Chaos became a system, if only for seconds. Sweat froze on Strange's face and shattered away. His hands trembled violently. The old nerve damage screamed through him, but the structure held. Through the viewports of nearby Imperial vessels, surviving crews stared in disbelief as the ragged wound in space transformed into a perfect revolving circle of disciplined force. This changes nothing. The god hissed within him. All order decays. All barriers fail. Maybe, Strange said. Just not today. He completed the final movement. The breach collapsed inward. Its energy folded through itself and fired back into the warp as a concentrated beam of structured force. Strange glimpsed impossible towers recoiling, labyrinths twisting away, vast attention hardening into fury. Then the connection snapped shut, with a concussive shockwave that hurled him backward through space. The cloak caught him before the spin became fatal. Around him, crippled Imperial ships were thrown free of the anomaly's pull. Systems died. Hulls held. The Aeldari craft swooped in and recovered him through the airlock, just before its own shielding failed. The moment atmosphere returned, Strange dropped to one knee. He had done it. The breach was closed, and with it, the cleanest path back to his own universe was gone. The pilot stood over him, unreadable. You succeeded. At a price, Strange managed. A new voice answered from behind. All victories here have won. Ethriel stood in the main chamber of the vessel, hands folded within his robes. Ulthwé owes you a debt, human sorcerer. Do not mistake that for affection. Strange pushed himself upright. Wouldn't dream of it. You have drawn the Changer's full attention, Ethriel said. That alone alters the skein. Yet the future is not closed. Your road home still exists, though it now runs through more peril than before. Comforting. Our people can help you, the Farseer continued. Not freely, not without calculation, but we can help. Why? Ethriel regarded him for a long moment. Because if Tzeentch sought you strongly enough to engineer your arrival, then your survival may matter beyond either of us. And because you opposed him successfully, that is not common. As the vessel returned toward Ulthwé, Strange looked out through the crystal canopy. The surviving Imperial ships were regrouping in the distance, guns turning with mechanical suspicion toward the craftworld. They had witnessed a power they could neither classify nor control. He knew exactly what that would provoke. They won't let this go, Strange said. No, Ethriel answered. But they cannot follow where we go next. Ulthwé loomed before them, black and bone against the starfield, vast as a city dreaming. Strange felt the exhaustion settle deeper into his bones now that the immediate crisis had passed. He would need rest, study, strategy. He would need to understand the warp without letting it understand him too well. He would need to survive the Imperium, the Drukhari, Ahriman, and whatever else lurked behind the curtains of this nightmare galaxy. And then something touched his mind. Subtle, ancient, golden, not Tzeentch, not an Aeldari seer, not anything he had yet encountered. A vast intelligence brushed his thoughts with impossible precision, as if testing his shape from across impossible distances. Strange saw, For the briefest instant, an image of golden armor, monumental age, and a throne built from sacrifice. The changer has marked you, the impression seemed to say. But others have seen as well. The game widens. Then it was gone. Strange stood very still in the center of the returning vessel, expression hardening. This universe had not simply caught him, it had noticed him. He followed Ethriel off the ship and onto the living craft world, the cloak of levitation settling around him like a scarlet banner against a black future. He was stranded in a galaxy where faith was tyranny, knowledge was corruption, prophecy was trauma, and every miracle came with teeth. But he was still Dr. Strange. He had walked into hells and rewritten their rules before. He would find a path home, and until he did, he would not allow this universe or its gods to decide what he became. Oathway slipped into the webway, vanishing from real space in a pulse of psychic light. Imperial guns fired too late. The craft world and its impossible human guest were already gone, carried into hidden corridors between stars and destinies too tangled, even for seers to chart cleanly. Far away, deep within the crystalline madness of the warp, Tzeentch watched shattered structures reassemble into newer and more elaborate forms. The intrusion had not gone as intended. The outsider had resisted. Worse, he had innovated. Such things were dangerous. Such things were interesting. And on the golden throne of Terra, in a chamber where incense failed to mask the smell of slow apocalypse, something ancient stirred behind dead eyes for the briefest possible moment. Whether in warning, hope, or hunger, no one present could have said. In the grim darkness of the far future, even certainty was a luxury. But somewhere beyond that certainty, carried through alien halls by stubborn purpose and impossible skill, the sorcerer supreme still lived. And that meant the game had changed.